Um, Hi there again. My name is Elena Donovan. I'm the Community Education Coordinator from Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center. So I want to again thank Santa Barbara City College for inviting me to be here today. We're really happy to collaborate with City College and support the work done here to make this as safe as a campus environment as possible and one that's free from all forms of sexual violence. What Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center does, we've been in the community now for 30 years, and our mission is to support survivors of sexual violence, as well as their significant others, their family members and friends, and to end and eliminate all forms of sexual violence from our community. So to that end, we provide crisis intervention services, including a 24-hour bilingual hotline, accompaniment and advocacy services to survivors and their loved ones, long-term counseling and support groups. And then on the prevention side, we offer self-defense classes for women and education throughout the community from middle schools, high schools, college campuses, community groups, and do a lot of training, educational campaigns, everything that we can do to try to get folks in our community talking about the issues of sexual violence and how we can end it and create the kind of safe, healthy relationships and communities that we'd like to see. So when we're talking about ending sexual violence and keeping ourselves safe, one of the most important things we can do is make a distinction between risk reduction work and prevention work. And so that's what I'd like to talk a little bit about today. Risk reduction refers to the things that we can do to help keep ourselves safer. That's what most of us are up here talking today. As an individual in a world where that I already know is violent and I already know carries considerable risk for experiencing some form of sexual violence, what can I do to keep myself safe? What are steps that I can take? But prevention is something different. Whereas risk reduction may refer to treating kind of the symptoms of the disease, prevention works to look at the causes. Say we want to stop first-time perpetration of sexual violence before it starts. We want to create a climate here on campus and in our communities where sexual violence is no longer tolerated. So here we're talking more about changing attitudes and behaviors that support the perpetration of sexual violence. And when we say sexual violence, we don't just mean rape, but we mean any kind of sexual contact without consent or that's forced upon a person that's unwanted. So that can be everything from sexual harassment that we might experience on the streets or in our workplace or in the classroom, sexual battery, which is touching a person against their will, and something that on a college campus can be taken really lightly and very much minimized, all the way to incest, child sexual abuse, and attempted rape and rape. So we're talking, and stalking I should mention as well, which some folks may forget that is also under the sexual assault umbrella. So when we talk about risk reduction and prevention, we should keep in mind that we don't want to just focus on rape, but remember that rape is connected to all these other forms of sexual assault that happen as well, even if it's just unwanted comments or unwanted touching that happens between students, either in their social lives or here on campus. So again, coming back to talking about risk reduction, one of the things that we often come up with first talking about risk reduction is, hey, take a self-defense class. That's a great option. Self-defense classes for women that we offer at the Rape Crisis Center are comprised of 3 parts: awareness, assertiveness, and physical self-defense techniques. And I'd like to focus on awareness for a moment because it's really the foundation for self-defense. And awareness means not just being aware of our surroundings, but starting with being aware of the problem and what are the realities of sexual violence. Most of us have grown up really steeped in the myths about sexual violence. We may learn that a rapist is a masked stranger who jumps out of the bushes, an assault that occurs in the middle of the night. While those are assaults, it's not that they never happen, they're actually pretty rare. The majority of sexual assaults in the nation, 85%, take place between people who know each other. So whereas we may grow up fearing an assault that might be perpetrated with a gun or a knife as a weapon, trust is most often the weapon that's used in the reality of sexual assaults that we face. And the majority of assaults, 6 out of 10, happen in the home of a survivor or the home of a family member or friend. So these are things we need to be aware of when we think of how we're going to protect ourselves. What's the reality there? What are we facing? Sexual violence is a gendered problem. The vast majority of perpetrators are male. Most studies show 95 to 95 to 99%, and the majority of the survivors are female. There are certainly male survivors of sexual assault as well, and they tend to have been assaulted by other men. So also something we want to keep in mind. When we're talking specifically about college campuses, the number of acquaintance rapes, so rapes that are happening between people who know each other versus strangers, gets even higher. One of the last studies to be done in year 2000 found that 9 out of 10 rapes that occur on college campuses were perpetrated by an acquaintance. So maybe a partner or an ex-partner, a coworker, a classmate, or a friend. And that same study found that a college campus that has 10,000 students might expect more than 350 rapes per year. Again, because there's such low reporting numbers for sexual assault, most studies find that only 1 in 9 rapes, or some have shown 16%, are actually reported to the police. It's hard to know what's really going on, how often this is occurring, but we know from the work that we do with survivors that it's extremely prevalent, and that most of us have been involved in either as a survivor or a significant other of a survivor in some kind of sexual assault at some point in our life. So it's something that's a reality for all of us. So really the first step for addressing the problem is recognizing that it does affect every one of us in terms of keeping ourselves safe and keeping our loved ones safe. Part of recognizing the problem as well is recognizing the context that it happens. I know that Jennifer will be speaking specifically about safety with alcohol and drugs, and knowing that alcohol and drug use is a risk factor for sexual violence, and to keep ourselves safe, it's extremely important to really be cautious when we're using alcohol and drugs. Make sure that we don't become intoxicated to the point that we lose control of ourselves or our surroundings. Knowing that when somebody has sexual activity with a person who's intoxicated, that is sexual assault. If a person is too drunk or too high to make a clear decision, legally they cannot give consent to sexual violence. So that also tells us that whoever is seeking out sexual activity has the responsibility to make sure that they're ascertaining clear consent from another person who's sober enough to do so. And if they fail to do that, that becomes a sexual assault. So knowing that alcohol and drugs are so commonly used to facilitate a sexual assault is really important too. Over 60% of the sexual assault survivors that we served during the last year at Santa Barbara Rape Crisis Center, the assaults involved alcohol or other drug use, either on the part of the survivor, the perpetrator, or both. So that's certainly a reality. Again, coming back to knowing that, what can we do to keep ourselves safe? Awareness of the problem is important. What is the likelihood or the chances that this might take place? Again, vulnerability to sexual assault has to do with somebody being perceived as vulnerable either because they're intoxicated, because of their physical size, because maybe they have a disability. Because sexual assault is always about power and control. It's not about what somebody was wearing. It's not about them having been flirtatious or led the perpetrator on. It's about the perpetrator perceiving that they're going to be able to get away with this, that they are going to be able to assault somebody who's unlikely to resist and unlikely to report afterwards. So that changes the way we might address this as well. Awareness. Techniques in terms of self-defense have to do with, yes, being aware of our surroundings when we're walking around campus, either at daytime or at night, but also being very aware in social situations, looking out for warning signs and trusting our instincts. If somebody doesn't respect your decisions in a regular context about what movie you want to go see or what you want to do, it's very unlikely that they'll respect your decisions in the context of sex and intimacy. Looking out for warning signs with the way people treat others, and particularly with attitudes around gender and around sex and violence, and really trusting that gut response. If something doesn't feel right, trust that. Many of us were taught that, you're probably being paranoid, let it go, but knowing that so many survivors of sexual assault later say, hey, I knew something wasn't right here. Trust that. Check it out. Beyond awareness, we move into assertiveness techniques, which are really essential for reducing the risk of sexual violence. There's a lot of great classes out there. It's something you can also learn in a self-defense class about how to how to communicate clearly your limits, decide where they are, and to hold the boundaries that feel right for you, to speak up immediately when somebody does something that's not okay. It's not uncommon for perpetrators to test potential victims and see if somebody will respond assertively right away. Is this somebody who's going to tell me immediately, no, I'm uncomfortable when you touch me or if you look at me like that immediately? Or is it someone who has a hard time speaking up and saying no and establishing where that boundary is that feels comfortable for them? So being willing to step out of your comfort zone to learn some assertiveness skills is really important. It's a process to learn. It's something that friends can really support each other in. And then physical self-defense techniques are also something that you can learn in a self-defense class. It's not something you have to be a martial arts expert to do either. There's a lot of really simple techniques that are fun to learn and very empowering, I think, too, to know that, particularly for women, there's a lot we can do with our brains, our voices, and our bodies to protect ourselves from a potential sexual assault. Now, moving a little bit to the prevention side, there are always laundry lists of things that we can do to keep ourselves safer in an environment that's already violent. But what can we do to really promote safety and create a campus environment and an environment in our community and within our relationships and our families that really says sexual violence is not tolerated here, that promotes healthy sexual relationships and relationships that are based on equality and respect? This is so important because all the things that we do to protect ourselves won't stop sexual assault from occurring in the first place. Even if I fight off an attacker, I didn't stop that sexual assault from occurring. I've still survived an attempted rape, and I'm very likely to have long-term impact in my life because of that. And I don't stop that person from moving on to somebody else who they see as being an easier target. How do we stop that? Part of that is really looking into and being willing to seek out information about why sexual assault happens so often. What are the attitudes and beliefs that support sexual violence? At the Rape Crisis Center, we believe that sexual assault is not something that's inherent, it's not human nature, but it's something that we learn. So having discussions about the way that often concepts of masculinity are linked to being sexually aggressive, or the attitudes that blame sexual assault survivors instead of holding perpetrators accountable are really important, because as long as we're focused on the survivor's behavior and how much that person was drinking or what she was wearing, we're not talking about the real issues at hand, which is why was that violence perpetrated in that first place? What made that person think that that was okay behavior that they could get away with? And how do we change that? A lot of that has to do with challenging the behavior when it comes up. Maybe it's jokes about rape that minimize it, treat it like it's something funny, and being willing to be the person that says, hey, that's absolutely not cool. I don't want to hear that. Nobody else does either. Being able to step up in that situation or interrupt sexual harassment when we see it, because we see that sexual harassment, even if it's just name-calling or catcalls or somebody being really inappropriate at a party, is linked to other forms of sexual violence like rape. And so saying, I'm going to be the person to say something in this situation is really important. That kind of intervention can make a great deal of difference because it creates a community environment that says, hey, we don't tolerate that kind of disrespect. We really want people to be treated with respect and have their boundaries taken seriously as well, because we know that every person has the right to determine what they're going to do in a particular situation, especially sexually. Let's see. So part of intervening in that situation may be intervening when we see something that looks really unsafe, where potential sexual assault might occur. Also saying, this is my business because I care about this community and because I know this affects me, and being somebody who's willing to get involved in a social situation when they see something going on that's not okay. And being willing to broach the issue with people that we know and we love, even though it might be uncomfortable, even though there's still a great deal of stigma and taboo that surrounds sexual violence, being willing to speak up about it and talk about, hey, why is it that we're still blaming survivors for what happened to them? How can we hold perpetrators accountable for their actions? What are ways that men can be role models for other men in order to learn how to to learn to be in relationships, teaching young boys to be in relationships that are based on equality as respect, as well as working with women to empower women to be assertive. And I don't mean to say that this only happens from men to women, but as we said earlier, it's certainly a gendered issue, and we need to take that into account when we're addressing the problem. There's a lot of ways that people can personally get involved in this, especially as students. This is your campus and these are your lives. There's a lot of groups that go out and do education about the prevalence of sexual violence in other places, and that's something that can happen here. There can be the workshops and discussion spaces where people can figure out for them, what are my attitudes about sexual violence? How does that either uphold it or help take it apart so it can't happen anymore? And how can I get involved? There's a lot to do in the broader community and resources out there if you're interested in more information about strategies for educational campaigns and things like that. But really being willing to take it on, even if it's just saying, well, maybe I'm not ready to join a group about it or become a public speaker on sexual violence, but I can bring this up when my friends make jokes about it or treat it like it's not a big deal, or when my family members say that they think that rape survivors are probably just making up stories, you being the person that steps up and says, you know what, I really don't think that's right, and I think that survivors deserve to be believed and supported so that they can come forward and access the resources they need to heal, and that perpetrators should be held responsible for their behavior, and that shouldn't be tolerated. That kind of voice, in your own words and in your own lives, can make a really powerful difference too. So again, I just want to end by saying there's two different strategies we can take here. Do everything you can to reduce your risk of being sexually assaulted. Take a self-defense class. Practice assertiveness skills. Do all the safety tips you can because you want to be safe, live an empowered life, and take care of yourself and those you love. But also think about what prevention means for you, and think about how you can help to combat myths and attitudes that support rape and replace them with things that encourage healthy relationships between all of us so that we feel safe in our relationships, we can enjoy ourselves, we can explore and go through a college experience without having to suffer, something that far too many of us have during college, which is all different forms of sexual violence. So thank you.